Colton Granger had lived 3 winters alone in his Wyoming cabin, each morning marked by the same ritual. Coffee brewed strong enough to stand a spoon in, silence broken only by the wind, and 5 seconds, never more, spent looking at Mary's photograph. February 1877 had brought the harshest cold in memory, turning the territory into a white wasteland that punished carelessness with death. He'd learned that lesson when Mary and their unborn child had been claimed by a blizzard similar to the one that had howled through the night, finally quieting as dawn broke. As he stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand to check his livestock, something carried on the wind, a sound impossible in this desolate place. He turned his head, listening. There it came again, unmistakably human, unmistakably desperate. A woman's cry, followed by the thin wail of an infant. Colton hesitated, one hand instinctively touching the wedding band he still wore. The last time he'd ventured out in weather like this, he'd returned to find his world destroyed. Some lessons weren't worth learning twice. Colton's faced a life-changing choice: maintain his hard-won isolation, or risk his heart to save a stranger and her helpless infants. What would you do if you heard that desperate cry in the wilderness? Would past loss keep you from risking everything again? Share your thoughts below. If you believe some people are worth saving, no matter the cost, hit that like button and subscribe for the full journey of a man discovering that family isn't always made by blood, but by the choices we make in our darkest moments. Colton Granger woke before dawn out of habit, not necessity. No one waited on his breakfast. No one needed his conversation. The cabin's silence pressed against him like a physical weight as he stirred the banked embers and added kindling with practiced efficiency. February 1877 had brought the harshest Wyoming winter in memory, and surviving it required discipline. Coffee bubbled in the battered pot, its aroma the one luxury he permitted himself. Steam ghosted from the cup as he poured, then dissipated like the life he'd once planned. 3 years since Mary's death, and still the cabin felt too large, too empty, despite its modest size. His morning ritual never varied: check the fire, brew the coffee, place a single tin plate on the rough-hewn table. His gaze swept past the small wooden frame on the shelf, Mary's photograph, allowing himself precisely 5 seconds to look at her face. Any longer invited madness, any shorter dishonored her memory. Outside, the wind had finally calmed after howling through the night. Fresh snow lay knee-deep across the yard, transforming the landscape into something alien and pure. Colton pulled on his heavy coat, settled his hat low over his eyes, and tucked his Winchester rifle under his arm. The cattle would need tending, snow or no snow. The cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped onto the porch. His breath clouded before him, and the vast white emptiness stretched to the distant mountains. This was why he'd chosen this place, miles from the nearest neighbor, far from sympathetic glances and whispered conversations that fell silent when he approached. Here, a man could keep his ghosts to himself. Colton paused, listening. Something carried on the wind, a sound impossible in this desolate place. He turned his head, straining to hear. The sound came again, unmistakably human, unmistakably desperate. A woman's cry, followed by the thin wail of an infant. Colton's hand tightened on his rifle as he scanned the endless white. Nothing moved except wind-driven snow. He hesitated, one hand instinctively touching the wedding band he still wore. The last time he'd ventured out in weather like this, he'd returned to find Mary gone, taken by a sudden blizzard while he was away trading cattle. Some lessons weren't worth learning twice. The cry came a third time, weaker now, from the direction of the north pasture. Colton cursed under his breath and stepped off the porch, snow swallowing his boots to mid-calf. Each step was a battle against the drifts as he followed the sound, Winchester ready. He found her tied to a fence post near the property line, a young woman, her face bruised and bloodless, dark hair frozen in matted clumps. Her hands were bound with rope, clothes inadequate for the killing cold. Bundled against her, wrapped in what appeared to be a man's coat, were 3 tiny infants. So still Colton first thought them dead. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, rifle forgotten, as he dropped to his knees beside them. The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused with cold and exhaustion. "Please," she managed, the word barely audible. "My girls." Colton pulled his knife and sliced through her bindings. Her skin was ice-cold, blue-tinged at the fingertips. Bad signs. One of the infants made a weak mewling sound. The other 2 remained terrifyingly silent. "Who did this?" Colton asked, already shrugging out of his coat to wrap around her. The woman's eyes closed, consciousness slipping away. Colton checked the babies, finding all 3 still breathing, though one's breaths came shallow and irregular. Whoever had left them here hadn't expected any to survive the night. Colton gathered the woman in his arms, careful not to dislodge the infants bundled against her. His mind raced through the brutal arithmetic of survival. The nearest town was 20 miles south, the nearest neighbor 12 miles east. The woman and babies wouldn't survive either journey. That left his cabin and his limited medical knowledge against Wyoming's killing cold. "Hold on," he muttered, unsure if she could hear. "Just hold on." The trek back seemed eternal, each step a battle against snow and growing urgency. The weakest infant's breathing grew more labored, tiny gasps visible in the frigid air. By the time Colton kicked open his cabin door, his arms burned with exertion and fear. He laid the woman on his bed, quickly building up the fire until the small space grew almost uncomfortably warm. Working with careful hands, he unwrapped the infants, 3 identical girls, so new their umbilical stumps were barely healed. Newborn triplets, impossibly tiny for this harsh world. One wasn't breathing. "No," Colton whispered, gently rubbing the infant's chest with one finger. "Come on, little one." He'd seen calves revive this way. Gentle chest pressure, clearing the airway, warming cold limbs. The infant remained still, skin taking on a bluish cast. Desperation mounting, Colton bent and gently breathed against the tiny face, the smallest puff of air into miniature lungs. The baby gasped, then wailed, a sound more beautiful than any Colton had heard in 3 years of silence. Relief surged through him, followed immediately by the weight of reality. 1 woman, 3 newborns, his isolated cabin, dwindling winter supplies. "What the hell am I doing?" he asked the empty air. But looking at the woman's bruised face and the 3 innocent lives now depending on him, Colton knew he had only one choice. He needed help, and that meant breaking his self-imposed exile. Some things mattered more than solitude. Some things demanded a man step beyond his own pain. The blizzard that had calmed at dawn returned with vengeance as Colton saddled his horse. Snow drove horizontally across the yard, visibility reduced to mere yards. Any sane man would wait for better conditions, but the blue-tinged baby and unconscious woman wouldn't survive that long. He'd done what he could, positioned the woman near the fire, arranged the infants beside her in a nest of blankets, left water and jerky within reach should she wake. It wouldn't be enough without proper help. 12 miles to Rebecca Winter's homestead. The widow had been a midwife back east before coming west with her husband. Since his death 2 years back, she'd become the closest thing to a doctor this remote corner of Wyoming territory possessed. Colton pulled his scarf across his face, leaving only his eyes exposed to the biting wind. "Easy, boy," he murmured to his horse, feeling the animal's tension. "We've ridden through worse. A lie, but necessary." The trail disappeared beneath fresh snow, forcing Colton to navigate by landmarks half hidden in the whiteout. A distinctive rock formation, the bend of a creek now frozen solid, the skeleton of a lightning-struck pine. Each mile took 3 times longer than normal, cold seeping through his clothes despite the exertion. By the time Rebecca's small cabin appeared through the curtain of white, Colton's hands had lost feeling and his thoughts had grown dangerously sluggish. He nearly fell dismounting, legs wooden from cold and the 12-mile ride. The cabin door opened before he could knock, revealing Rebecca's concerned face. "Colton Granger. What in God's name?" "Woman and babies," he managed through numb lips. "Need help. Now." Rebecca worked with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to emergencies. Within minutes, she had gathered her medical supplies and thrown essentials into a saddlebag. "Wait," she said, as Colton prepared to mount again. "Samuel should come too." Colton's brow furrowed. "The Arapaho? What for?" "He knows medicines I don't," Rebecca replied, already pulling on her heavy coat. "Especially for newborns, and you look half frozen yourself." Colton didn't argue. His limited interactions with Samuel Blackwood had shown the man to be knowledgeable, if reserved. The native healer lived in a small cabin behind Rebecca's property, tolerated by most settlers for his medical skills, though rarely welcomed otherwise. Samuel joined them without question once Rebecca explained, bringing a leather pouch of herbs and remedies. The return journey was slower still, 3 riders battling the storm, but Colton's anxiety made every minute feel like an hour. When they finally reached his cabin, the scene inside stopped them at the threshold. The woman had awakened and sat propped weakly against the headboard, one infant clutched protectively to her chest. Her eyes widened with fear at the sight of strangers. "It's all right," Colton said quickly. "This is Rebecca, a midwife, and Samuel. They're here to help." Rebecca moved forward with a reassuring smile. "Those are beautiful babies, ma'am. May I?" The woman hesitated, then nodded, revealing extensive bruising as she shifted. Rebecca's expression remained professional, but her eyes met Colton's briefly, communicating volumes. Samuel approached more cautiously, setting down his medicine pouch. "The smallest one struggles to breathe," he observed quietly. "She stopped breathing earlier," Colton confirmed. "I managed to revive her, but—" Rebecca was already examining the infant in question, her experienced hands gentle but thorough. "Fever," she announced grimly. "We need to work quickly." Night had fallen by the time they stabilized all 3 infants. Samuel's herbal remedies and Rebecca's midwifery skills had worked minor miracles, though the smallest triplet remained worryingly weak. The woman, Josie Quinn, she'd finally told them, sat wrapped in Colton's warmest blanket, watching their every move with exhausted vigilance. "They're barely a day old," Rebecca said quietly to Colton as they stepped away to make coffee. "Born during the storm, I'd guess. It's a miracle any of them survived, let alone all 3. "Someone tied her to that post," Colton replied, voice hard. "Left them all to die." Rebecca's lips thinned. "I've seen the bruises. This wasn't the first beating." Samuel approached, having finished preparing a tea for Josie. "She carries medicine bark in her blood," he observed. "My people use it for fever. Someone tried to help before they were abandoned." "Who would do this?" Rebecca asked, Glancing back at the bed where Josie now dozed, one hand still touching the makeshift cradle holding her daughters. Josie's voice surprised them all. "Clayton Quinn did this," she said, eyes open and suddenly clear. "My husband." Colton turned. "Quinn." "The cattle baron from Green River?" Josie nodded weakly. "We married a year ago. I came west from Boston, thinking it romantic." Her bitter laugh held no humor. "When I gave birth to girls instead of the sons he wanted, he said nature could decide if they were worth keeping." The room fell silent, except for the crackling fire and the soft sounds of the sleeping infants. "He owns half the territory," Samuel said finally. "Many men on his payroll." "He'll want his property back," Josie whispered. "That's how he sees us." A sharp knock at the door made them all start. Colton's hand moved to his rifle before a familiar voice called out, "Granger, it's Marshal Holden. Need a word." Colton opened the door to find the territorial marshal snow-covered and grim-faced. "Quinn's offering a reward for information about his missing wife," Holden said without preamble. "Claims she ran off with his newborn sons." "Thought you should know." His eyes moved past Colton to where Josie sat with her daughters, and his expression said everything words couldn't. A week passed in the crowded cabin, each day establishing new rhythms and unexpected harmony. The triplets, still unnamed, as if Josie feared tempting fate, grew stronger under constant care. Even the smallest had stabilized, her breathing more regular, her cries more insistent. Colton found himself adapting to the invasion of his solitude with surprising ease. His large hands, skilled at breaking horses and mending fences, learned to change swaddling cloths and test milk temperature against his wrist. Rebecca had shown him how to fashion a cradle board similar to those used by Arapaho mothers, which kept the infant secure while allowing adults to work. "You have a natural touch," Samuel observed one morning, watching Colton soothe a fussing infant. "Some men fear such tasks." Colton shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "Just doing what needs doing." Josie's bruises had faded from purple to yellow, and her strength returned gradually. This morning she sat by the window, sunlight highlighting the copper in her dark hair as she nursed one of the triplets. "They need names," Rebecca said, mixing cornmeal for breakfast. "Brings bad luck, leaving a child unnamed." Josie's eyes remained on her daughter's face. "Quinn would have named sons after his father and grandfather. He said girls weren't worth naming." "All the more reason to give them strong names," Samuel replied. "Names have power." The peaceful domestic scene shattered as Samuel glanced out the window, his posture suddenly alert. "Rider coming?" Moving fast. Colton joined him, recognizing the approaching figure immediately. "Marshal Holden again," his voice lowered. "And he's wearing his official face, not his friendly one." The room fell silent as Josie gathered her daughter closer, instinctive protection in every line of her body. The other two infants slept peacefully, unaware that their fragile world might soon be upended. Marshal Holden refused to come inside, gesturing for Colton to join him on the porch instead. His expression was troubled, official badge prominent on his coat. "Got bad news, Granger," he said quietly, glancing toward the cabin. "Clayton Quinn's filed legal papers. Says his wife is mentally unstable. Ran off with his newborn sons during a fit of madness." "Sons?" Colton repeated. "Those are girls in there, Jim. 3 of them." "I know what they are," Holden replied, lowering his voice further. "But the law says a wife and her children are her husband's property. Quinn's got a judge's order demanding their return." Colton's jaw tightened. "Did your judge's order mention Quinn tied her to a post in a blizzard?" Left his daughters to die because they weren't boys? Holden removed his hat, running a hand through graying hair. Off the record. I believe you. But officially, I've got no choice but to inform you that harboring Josie Quinn against her husband's legal claim is asking for trouble. She'll die if she goes back, Colton said flatly. Those babies, too. Maybe so. Holden replaced his hat, straightening his shoulders. But that's not for you or me to decide, legally speaking. Since when does the law trump basic human decency? Since always, in matters like these. Holden's eyes held genuine regret. I'm telling you this as a friend, Colton. Quinn's men are coming, and they're coming with the law on their side. Be careful how you play this. As if summoned by the warning, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, riders approaching from the south, at least 6 by Colton's estimation. Too late for careful, Colton observed. You riding with them, Marshal? Holden mounted his horse, expression pained. I've done my duty by warning you. What happens next? I didn't see it. Colton returned to the cabin, finding 4 anxious faces watching him. Quinn's men coming, he said simply, checking his rifle. 6 riders, maybe more. We should run, Josie said, voice tight with fear. Triplets wouldn't survive, Rebecca replied. Not in this cold. Samuel moved to the window, assessing. They come with purpose, not hunters tracking, but men who know their destination. Colton made quick decisions, positioning Rebecca and Josie with the babies in the bedroom, the only room with no windows, while he and Samuel took defensive positions. Not that Samuel was armed. The Arapaho carried only a knife, possession of firearms being forbidden to Indians by territorial law. The riders approached with military precision, spreading out to surround the small cabin. Their leader, a hard-faced man with a cavalry mustache, dismounted and stepped forward. We've come for Mrs. Josie Quinn and her children, he called. By order of her husband and the territorial court. Colton stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. No one by that name here. Don't play games, Granger. We know she's inside. The man produced an official-looking document. This says Clayton Quinn's wife and sons are to be returned to him immediately. Anyone interfering will be charged with kidnapping. Interesting, Colton replied evenly. Since Mrs. Quinn gave birth to 3 daughters, not sons, seems there's some confusion. The leader's face hardened. Girls or boys, they belong to Quinn. Step aside. The woman tied to my fence post, left to freeze to death with her newborns? Colton's voice remained calm, but his grip tightened on the rifle. That woman deserves protection, not a return to her abuser. That's not your decision to make. The leader's hand moved toward his holster. Last chance to do this peacefully. Inside the cabin, a baby began to cry. The sound hung in the tense air between the armed men like a challenge. The first shot came from one of the riders, a nervous young man startled by a rabbit bursting from snow cover. His bullet splintered the porch railing beside Colton, who dropped to one knee and returned fire in a single fluid motion, not aiming to kill, those days were behind him, but making his point as the leader's hat flew from his head. What followed was brief but violent, a chaotic exchange of gunfire that ended with 2 of Quinn's men wounded, the others retreating with curses and threats. Samuel had been grazed along one arm, the wound minor but painful. Rebecca bandaged it with practiced efficiency while Josie calmed her frightened daughters. They'll be back, Samuel said, wincing as Rebecca tied off the bandage, with more men. Colton nodded, reloading his rifle. Quinn won't let this stand. Man like that, used to getting his way. The cabin door opened again to reveal Marshal Holden, returning alone. His expression was grave as he removed his hat, an official gesture that made Colton's stomach tighten. "Colton Granger," he said formally, "I'm required to inform you that Clayton Quinn has filed kidnapping charges against you for the taking of his wife and children." The room fell silent, except for an infant's soft whimper. "That's a hanging offense," Rebecca said finally. Holden nodded. "Quinn's claiming you seduced his wife away, that the whole abandonment story is fabrication." He glanced at Josie. "He's got witnesses who'll swear they saw her leave willingly with you, Granger." "Bought witnesses," Colton replied. "No doubt," Holden agreed, "but their money spends just the same as honest folks." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Quinn's brother Thomas has been asking questions around town. Seems he's not convinced of his brother's story." "Might be worth knowing." The marshal replaced his hat. "I've done all I legally can. The rest is up to you." Dark clouds gathered on the northern horizon the next morning, a familiar sight that knotted Colton's stomach. He'd survived enough Wyoming winters to read the signs. Another blizzard approaching, potentially worse than the last. "Storm coming," he announced, returning from checking the livestock. "Bad one." Rebecca followed his gaze to the threatening sky. "How long?" "Hours, not days. Need to prepare." They worked with quiet urgency, securing shutters, bringing in extra firewood, moving livestock to sheltered areas. Samuel reinforced the damaged porch while Josie organized supplies inside, the triplets sleeping in their makeshift cradle. As Colton split another log for the woodpile, the rhythmic thunk of the axe triggered unwelcome memories. A similar storm 3 years ago, Mary insisting she was fine alone while he traded cattle in the next valley. The desperate ride home as the blizzard intensified. Finding the cabin empty, following tracks already disappearing under fresh snow, discovering her body curled against a fallen tree, frozen in a futile attempt to reach the neighbor's place when labor pains started early. "Colton?" Josie's voice pulled him back to the present. She stood nearby, concern etching her features. "You've been standing there for several minutes." He blinked, realizing the axe had stilled in his hands. "Just remembering another storm." Something in his tone must have revealed more than his words, because understanding dawned in her eyes. "The one that took your wife?" Colton nodded once, resuming his chopping with renewed force. "Won't let this one take anyone else." The wind picked up, driving the first snowflakes before it. Within the hour, visibility had dropped to mere feet beyond the cabin. Inside, they gathered in the warmth, listening to the storm's growing fury. Samuel glanced at Colton. "And your wife's spirit watches over us tonight. The Arapaho believe those lost to winter become its guardians." Before Colton could respond, the first gunshot shattered the window beside him. "Get down!" Colton shouted, dragging Josie to the floor as glass exploded inward. More shots followed, splintering wood and thudding into the cabin's log walls. Rebecca crawled to the triplets, shielding them with her body, while Samuel moved with surprising speed to extinguish the lamps, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by firelight. "They're using the storm for cover," Colton muttered, retrieving his rifle. "Smart." Through the broken window came a man's voice, nearly lost in the howling wind. "Send out the woman and her brats, Granger. Nobody needs to die tonight." Colton answered with a carefully aimed shot that struck wood near the voice, earning a curse and momentary silence. "How many?" Samuel asked, pressing against the wall beside another window. "Hard to tell in this weather. 6, maybe more." Colton handed his revolver to Rebecca. "You know how to use this?" She nodded grimly. "George taught me before he passed." Another volley of shots tore through the cabin, one bullet passing so close to Josie that she felt its heat against her cheek. She clutched her smallest daughter, eyes wide with terror, but remarkably steady. The attack continued in waves, gunfire followed by demands for surrender, then more gunfire when no response came. Colton returned fire sparingly, conserving ammunition, using the storm and darkness to their advantage. Samuel reinforced vulnerable points, improvising barricades from furniture. A sudden crash from the rear of the cabin signaled a new threat, someone attempting to break through the back door. Colton raced to intercept, firing twice through the door itself. A scream confirmed his aim, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. "They're trying to surround us," he called to the others. Rebecca positioned herself to cover the rear approach, while Colton returned to the front. For nearly an hour, the siege continued, bullets exchanged with increasing desperation on both sides. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack ceased. The storm's voice alone filled the night, punctuated by the soft whimpering of an infant and the ragged breathing of the defenders. "Are they gone?" Josie whispered. "No," Colton replied, peering cautiously through the shattered window. "Just regrouping." Or, the lull continued as night deepened. Outside, the blizzard raged unabated, providing both protection and threat. Any attackers would struggle in the conditions, but so would anyone seeking escape or help. They took inventory of their situation by firelight. No serious injuries, though Samuel had a shallow cut from flying glass. The cabin had suffered worse, windows broken, door damaged, bullets embedded in walls. Cold air seeped through new gaps, making the fire work harder to maintain warmth. Josie sat near the hearth, all three daughters gathered close. The ordeal had left her pale but resolute, a far cry from the broken woman Colton had found tied to a post. "You didn't freeze," she observed quietly, as Colton checked the rifle's ammunition. He glanced up, questioning. "During the attack," she clarified. "In the storm. You didn't freeze this time." The observation struck deeper than any bullet could have. She was right. Unlike that night 3 years ago, fear hadn't paralyzed him. He'd acted, protected, fought back. "Had something worth protecting this time," he replied simply. Rebecca and Samuel exchanged glances across the room, a silent communication passing between them. "Those babies need names," Rebecca said, breaking the tension. "Especially if we're fighting a war over them." A ghost of a smile touched Josie's lips. "I've been thinking on it. The strongest will be Catherine, after my grandmother, the middle one, Elizabeth, for my mother, and the smallest—" She looked at Colton. "Mary, if that sits well with you." The simple gesture left Colton speechless, a knot forming in his throat as he nodded once. Dawn arrived with merciful calm, the storm spent, and sunshine glittering across pristine snow. The attackers had indeed withdrawn, leaving only trampled snow and bullet holes as evidence of the night's violence. Colton stood guard while the others rested, watching the horizon for any sign of movement. His vigilance was rewarded mid-morning when a lone rider appeared, approaching slowly with one arm raised in the universal gesture of peace. "Someone coming," he called. "Just one man." They gathered at the window, weapons ready despite the apparent peaceful approach. As the rider drew closer, Josie gasped. "It's Thomas," she said, disbelief in her voice. "Clayton's brother." Thomas Quinn resembled his brother in build and coloring, but lacked the coldness in his eyes. He dismounted carefully, keeping his hands visible. "I'm unarmed," he called. "Just want to talk." Colton met him on the bullet-scarred porch, rifle ready, but not aimed. "You've got nerve coming here after last night," Colton said. Thomas shook his head. "Wasn't my doing. I've been trying to find Josie since she disappeared." His eyes moved to the doorway, where Josie now stood. "Thank God you're alive." "Why would you care?" she asked bitterly. "You never stopped him before." "I tried," Thomas replied, genuine pain in his expression. "Not hard enough, clearly, but I'm trying now." He turned back to Colton. "Clayton's gathering more men, 20 at least. He's coming himself next time." "Why tell us this?" Colton demanded. "Those babies are my nieces." Thomas's voice dropped. "I've watched Clayton destroy people for years. Couldn't save their mother before, but maybe—" He stopped, straightening his shoulders. "You've got 3 days, maybe 4. Get her somewhere safe, if you can." As Thomas mounted to leave, a cry from inside drew their attention. The smallest triplet, little Mary, had developed a dangerous fever overnight. Their brief moment of respite had ended. The day passed in desperate focus on the smallest triplet's survival. Mary's tiny body burned with fever despite Rebecca's ministrations and Samuel's herbal remedies. Her sisters thrived, seemingly stronger by the hour, making her decline all the more stark. "We need medicines I don't have," Rebecca said, voice tight with frustration as she bathed the infant's forehead. "Proper medicines." Samuel shook his head. "The snow makes travel impossible for now. Even if it didn't, the nearest town is too far." Colton took inventory of their situation, the assessment grim. The attack had depleted ammunition. Food stores would last perhaps another week with careful rationing. Firewood remained adequate only if the weather improved soon. And now the threat of Clayton's larger force loomed over them all. "He doesn't know Thomas warned us," Josie observed, cradling Catherine and Elizabeth while watching Mary's labored breathing. "That gives us some advantage." "Not enough," Colton replied. "Not against 20 men." The day waned into evening, each hour marked by Mary's weakening cries and increasingly desperate attempts to bring her fever down. Outside, the temperature plummeted again, winter reasserting its grip after the storm's passing. Josie finally voiced what they all feared. "She's dying, isn't she?" Rebecca's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "I don't know. She's fighting, but she's so small." "Small doesn't mean weak," Samuel observed quietly. The smallest trees often bend rather than break in storms, but the practical reality remained unchanged. They were isolated, under-resourced, and facing both natural and human threats. Mary's survival seemed increasingly tied to an impossible choice. Safety for the majority might require sacrifice from some. Colton stepped outside, needing space to think. The cold air bit at his face as he stared toward the horizon where Thomas had disappeared. 3 days, maybe 4. Not enough time to formulate a proper plan, but perhaps enough to make an impossible decision. Josie found him on the porch an hour later, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. Her face showed the strain of constant vigilance, but her eyes remained clear and determined. "I know what you're thinking," she said without preamble. "I've been thinking it too." Colton turned to her, questioning. "If I surrender myself to Clayton," she continued, "I could negotiate for the girl's safety." "And yours." She gazed across the snow-covered land. "He wants me back to save his pride. The girls he never wanted." "He'd never honor that bargain," Colton replied, the words coming harder than expected. "Men like Quinn don't negotiate. They dominate." "Perhaps, but Mary needs medicines we don't have. Catherine and Elizabeth need safety we can't provide." Her voice remained steady despite the enormity of what she proposed. 1 life traded for 4. It's simple arithmetic." "Nothing simple about it," Colton countered, surprised by the surge of protectiveness he felt. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the broken victim he'd found in the snow. This Josie stood straight-backed and clear-eyed, a mother willing to walk back into hell for her children. "I can't have another child die because of him, because of me." Her voice finally cracked. "I couldn't bear it." Colton's hand moved of its own accord, covering hers where it rested on the porch railing. The unexpected contact surprised them both. "Give me tonight," he said finally. "One night to find another way." Their eyes held for a long moment, mutual understanding passing between them. Both recognized the likely futility of the delay, but neither was ready to surrender hope completely. "One night," she agreed. Inside, Mary's feverish cry rose again, a tiny sound against the vast Wyoming silence. One more innocent life hanging in the balance of choices made by those with power to help or harm. Night settled over the cabin, bringing uneasy quiet. Rebecca and Samuel had finally succumbed to exhaustion, sleeping fitfully near the fire. Catherine and Elizabeth slept peacefully in their makeshift cradle, untroubled by their sister's distress. Colton sat alone with Mary, the smallest triplet cradled against his chest. Her fever burned through the thin blanket, her breathing shallow and irregular. He'd insisted Josie rest, promising to wake her at any change. "Hang on, little one," he murmured, gently stroking the infant's cheek with one calloused finger. "You're named for a fighter, you know." The fire crackled softly as he continued his quiet monologue, words coming easier to the unconscious infant than they ever did to adults. "My Mary wouldn't give up either, stubborn woman, knew her mind." His voice dropped lower. "Should have been there when she needed me. Storm came too fast, but that's no excuse. A man protects what matters, no matter the cost." Mary's tiny hand flexed against his shirt, fingers curling and uncurling in unconscious movement. "Your mama's willing to die for you girls. Walk back to a monster to keep you safe." Colton's throat tightened. That kind of courage. Don't see it often. Worth protecting. Worth fighting for. As the night deepened, Colton continued his vigil, alternately bathing the infant's forehead and keeping her warm against the chill. Sometime near midnight, he found himself speaking of things long buried, his hopes before Mary's death, his plans for children of his own, the crushing guilt that had driven him to isolation. "Been hiding for 3 years, he confessed to the silent infant. "Figured if I didn't care about anyone, couldn't fail them again. But that's not living, that's just waiting to die." Dawn's first light found Colton still awake, the infant still in his arms. But something had changed. Mary's forehead felt cooler against his hand, her breathing deeper and more regular. "Colton?" Josie's voice came softly from the shadows. She moved forward, anxiety clear in her expression as she reached for her daughter. "The fever's breaking," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. Josie's fingers confirmed his assessment, tears welling in her eyes. "She's stronger," she whispered, looking from her daughter to Colton with something approaching awe. Samuel appeared beside them, his quiet presence a comfort after the long night. He checked the infant with gentle hands, then nodded. The strongest medicine is sometimes presence, the will to fight for someone. Colton stood, decision made in the long hours of night vigil. "We're not surrendering, not you, not them, whatever comes." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, binding them together more surely than any formal vow. Outside, the rising sun transformed the snow-covered landscape from threatening white void to glittering promise. The first hint that winter, like all seasons, must eventually yield to spring. 2 weeks passed, bringing the first tentative signs of spring. Snow began retreating from south-facing slopes, and the brutal cold softened to merely uncomfortable chill. Mary had fully recovered, joining her sisters in robust health that seemed miraculous after their ordeal. More miraculous still was the transformation of Colton's isolated homestead. A word had spread through the scattered ranching community about Clayton Quinn's actions and the stand being taken against him. Initially, this brought only curious visitors, but as the story unfolded, something unexpected happened. People began to take sides. This morning, Colton's small cabin hosted an impromptu council of neighbors. Jacob Harlow, whose ranch bordered Quinn land to the south, leaned over the rough map spread across the table. "Quinn's been pushing boundaries for years," he observed, tracing the disputed property lines with a weathered finger. "Forced 3 smaller spreads out of business last season alone." Beside him, William Foster nodded grimly. "Damned the creek that watered my east pasture," claimed it was all his water rights. Samuel Blackwood stood slightly apart, his presence still uncomfortable for some of the white ranchers. Yet even they had begun acknowledging his insights with grudging respect. "The law may recognize Quinn's claim to his wife," Samuel noted, "but his actions speak of a man who has forgotten what it means to be human." Rebecca looked up from where she was preparing coffee. "Clayton Quinn's been the law around here too long. Man thinks he owns everything and everyone." Josie entered from the bedroom where the triplets napped, her face showing surprise at the gathering. The past weeks had transformed her from victim to survivor, her natural strength emerging as healing progressed. "We're making plans," Colton explained. "Quinn's men will come again, but this time we'll be ready." Jacob Harlow rose, extending his hand to Josie. "Ma'am, what that man did goes against everything decent folks stand for. You've got friends now." When the strategy session concluded and the ranchers departed to spread word of Quinn's impending attack, Josie asked Colton to remain behind. Something in her expression suggested importance. "There's something I haven't told you," she began once they were alone. "Something that might help." From beneath the floorboard under her bed, she retrieved a small oilskin packet, carefully wrapped and sealed. "I took these before I left. It's why Clayton's so desperate to find me, more than just wounded pride." Colton unwrapped the package, revealing several folded documents. As he examined them, his expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. "These are land deeds," he said, "with different signatures on them, and ledgers showing—" "Bribes," Josie finished. "Payments to judges, territorial officials. Clayton's been forging deeds, stealing land legally for years." She sat beside him, fingers tracing the incriminating figures. "I was his bookkeeper before we married. I knew his business practices weren't entirely honest, but I didn't realize the extent until later." "This is enough to ruin him," Colton said quietly. "Maybe even prison time. It's why he can't let me go, not just because I'm his property in the eyes of the law, but because I know too much." Her eyes met his, steady and determined. "I wasn't just running from a beating, Colton. I was trying to reach the circuit judge in Green River when the babies came early." The implications unfolded between them. Not just a domestic dispute to be dismissed by frontier justice, but evidence of systematic corruption that could bring down one of the territory's most powerful men. "Judge Harmon in Green River," Colton mused. "He's known to be honest. These papers would matter to him." "If we could get them to him," Josie agreed. "But with Quinn watching all the roads—" "Maybe that's our answer," Colton said slowly. not just defending, but attacking, on our terms, not his. Their plan took shape over the next day. Samuel would take the documents to Judge Harmon, while the others created a diversion. With spring making travel easier, a fast rider could reach Green River in 2 days if the weather held. Eli Cooper, a young ranch hand from the Foster place, volunteered to carry messages between the scattered allies. His slight build and knowledge of back trails made him ideal for slipping past Quinn's watchers. "Everyone's in position," Eli reported that evening, returning from his rounds. "Harlow's men are watching the south road. Foster's got the east. You'll know when Quinn's men move." The plan seemed solid. Samuel would leave before dawn, taking the evidence by the least traveled routes. The others would remain at the ranch, prepared for Quinn's attack, but able to withdraw strategically if necessary. What no one anticipated was treachery from within. The warning came near midnight, a desperate pounding at the door that revealed one of Harlow's ranch hands, bloody and exhausted from a hard ride. "Cooper sold you out," he gasped, collapsing into a chair. "Took your plans straight to Quinn for $50. The news hit like a physical blow. Their carefully constructed strategy now known to the enemy. The escape routes, the timing, the positions of their allies, all compromised. Quinn's gathered almost 20 men, the messenger continued. They're coming at dawn, not just hired hands this time, professional gunmen from as far as Cheyenne. Colton's mind raced, recalculating their options. Samuel? Already gone, Rebecca confirmed. Left an hour ago, before Cooper could have reached Quinn. At least the evidence might still reach Judge Harmon, but their defensive position was critically weakened. Escape no longer possible. They would have to stand and fight against overwhelming odds. "So much for leaving before they arrive," Josie said, her voice calm, despite the dire news. Rebecca nodded grimly. "We make our stand here, then." "My daughters were born fighters," Josie replied, a hint of fierce pride breaking through her fear. "Seems fitting they'll see their first battle." Dawn broke clear and cold, the spring sunshine deceptively peaceful across the ranch yard. Colton had positioned their defenders strategically. Rebecca and Josie inside with the triplets, Harlow's men concealed in the barn, Foster and his hands behind the corral. 8 against 20 weren't favorable odds, but determination counted for something. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon exactly as predicted, growing larger as Clayton Quinn's force approached. Unlike previous attacks, this one came with no attempt at stealth, a show of overwhelming force meant to intimidate. Clayton Quinn himself rode at the front, distinguishable even at distance by his expensive coat and the distinctive white stallion that was his trademark. Beside him rode men whose very posture spoke of professional violence, guns worn like natural extensions of their bodies. "Remember," Colton told the others, "we need only hold them until Samuel reaches Judge Harmon. Every hour we gain matters." The riders halted at a cautious distance, and Clayton Quinn urged his horse forward alone. He sat tall in the saddle, handsome in a cold way that suggested calculation rather than passion. Nothing in his well-groomed appearance hinted at the cruelty Josie had described. "Granger," he called. "I've come for my wife and my property." Colton stepped into the open, rifle held casually but ready. "Mrs. Quinn and her daughters are under my protection." Clayton's expression flickered at the word daughters, genuine disgust crossing his features before the mask of civility returned. "Girls," he spat. "Worthless. I need sons to carry on the Quinn name." The cabin door opened, and Josie emerged to stand beside Colton. Her head was held high, No trace of the broken woman who'd been tied to a post weeks earlier. "These daughters will carry my name now," she called clearly. "Quinn has no claim to them." Clayton's face darkened. "You are my wife under law, and those—" He gestured dismissively toward the cabin where the triplets remained with Rebecca. "Are my property to dispose of as I choose. $50 for the woman," he continued, addressing Colton with the casual air of a man negotiating livestock. "The runts you can keep. I'm feeling generous today." The insulting offer hung in the air between them, a final chance to avoid bloodshed at the cost of everything that mattered. "No deal," Colton replied simply. Clayton's face tightened with anger. "Then you've chosen the hard way." He raised his hand, signaling his men. "Kill everyone except my wife. Burn everything to the ground." The first volley came as a coordinated barrage, bullets splintering wood and shattering windows. Colton and Josie dove for cover as the defenders returned fire, the peaceful morning erupting into chaos. From his position behind an overturned wagon, Colton picked his targets carefully, making each shot count. Foster and his men provided covering fire from the corral, while Harlow's group engaged from the barn's hayloft. Despite being outnumbered, their defensive positions gave temporary advantage. The battle intensified as Quinn's men attempted to circle the cabin, searching for weaknesses. Two of the hired guns fell to well-placed shots from Foster, while another clutched his arm, disabled by Rebecca's unexpected accuracy from a cabin window. Clayton remained behind his men, shouting orders and curses in equal measure. His expression grew increasingly desperate as the easy victory he'd expected failed to materialize. The turning point came unexpectedly. As Quinn's men regrouped for another assault, new riders appeared on the eastern ridge, more neighbors joining the fight, drawn by the gunfire and rumors of Quinn's aggression. The balance shifted further when Thomas Quinn emerged from the trees to the north, leading several ranch hands who wore Quinn colors, but now sided with their employer's brother. Seeing reinforcements, Clayton abandoned caution for rage. He spurred his white stallion forward, pistol drawn, charging directly toward Colton and Josie. "She's mine!" he screamed, firing wildly. "Mine!" Colton stepped into the open, rifle raised. Their eyes met across the churned earth of the yard, Clayton's filled with entitlement and fury, Colton's steady with resolve. Both men fired simultaneously. Clayton's shot went wide. Colton's found its mark. The powerful rancher toppled from his saddle, shock replacing rage on his face as he clutched his chest. His remaining men, seeing their employer fall and facing mounting opposition, quickly surrendered or fled. The gunfire faded, leaving only echoes across the valley and the groans of the wounded. The battle had lasted less than 30 minutes, but had forever changed the balance of power in the territory. 1 week later, Judge Harmon arrived from Green River, accompanied by territorial marshals and Samuel Blackwood. The evidence Josie had preserved proved even more damning than anticipated, revealing not just land fraud, but also bribery of officials and witnesses to multiple crimes. Clayton Quinn had survived his wound, but would face trial once recovered. The first time in memory that one of the territory's wealthy had been held accountable for crimes against those with less power. Thomas Quinn had assumed control of his brother's holdings, already working to make amends to neighboring ranchers harmed by Clayton's actions. Life at Colton's ranch had settled into a new normal. The cabin repairs were nearly complete, with an addition being built to accommodate the growing needs of 3 infant girls. Rebecca had decided to stay on, her midwifery skills a welcome addition to the isolated community. On this particular spring afternoon, Colton stood on the newly repaired porch, watching Josie in the garden. She looked up, sensing his gaze, and smiled, a simple gesture that still surprised him with its warmth. "Judge Harmon says the divorce papers should be approved within the month," she called. "He's expediting them given the circumstances." Colton nodded, still unused to the idea of legal proceedings working in favor of ordinary people. "And the girls?" "Legally mine, with no claim from Clayton." Her pride in this victory was evident. "Judge says it's unprecedented, but so is everything else about this case." He joined her in the garden, where the first green shoots promised summer bounty. Catherine, Elizabeth, and Mary slept nearby in their cradle, peaceful under the watchful eye of Samuel, who sat whittling small wooden animals for them. "What will you do now?" Colton asked, the question that had lingered between them for days. Josie's hand found his, fingers intertwining naturally. "Build something new," she replied simply. "If you're amenable to company." The Wyoming spring unfurled around them, winter's grip finally broken. 3 small girls slept in the sunshine, safe and cherished, and 2 people who had each lost everything found themselves unexpectedly with a second chance at family, one formed not by blood or law, but by choice and sacrifice, and the quiet courage to begin again. "Well, partner, we've traveled a long trail together through Wyoming's harshest winter and witnessed something remarkable along the way." If you're feeling a touch of emotion after sharing Colton and Josie's journey, the desperate rescue, the standoffs in blinding snow, the night vigil with a feverish infant, I understand completely. Their story has stayed with me long after the writing, and I suspect those triplet girls might have found a place in your heart too. There's something about the frontier that strips away pretense and reveals what truly matters. Colton spent 3 years believing isolation was his only protection against further loss, convinced his failure to save Mary had defined him forever. But redemption isn't about erasing our past. It's about finding the courage to risk our hearts again when the opportunity presents itself. And it always does, doesn't it? That moment when we must choose between the safety of disconnection and the vulnerability of caring for others. What struck me most while writing this story was how family forms in the spaces between bloodlines. The law of 1877 might have declared Josie and her daughters Clayton's property, but true family emerged through Colton's choice to protect them, through Rebecca's healing hands, through Samuel's wisdom that crossed cultural boundaries. Sometimes, the people we choose to stand beside create stronger bonds than any we're born into. Researching women's lives in the Wyoming Territory revealed both heartbreaking limitations and astonishing courage. Women like Josie faced nearly insurmountable legal obstacles, yet many found ways to build lives of dignity and purpose despite the system designed to constrain them. Their resilience reminds me that we all face moments when the odds seem overwhelming, when standing up for what's right feels impossible. Yet like winter yielding to spring, perseverance eventually brings new beginnings. In the end, Colton and Josie learned what the frontier taught anyone brave enough to survive it. We aren't defined by our worst moments, but by how we respond when others need us most. Second chances aren't simply given. They're earned through actions that prove we've grown beyond our past failures. Thank you for riding through this Wyoming winter with me, friend. Stories only truly live when they find readers willing to invest their hearts in flawed characters trying to become better. Your willingness to follow Colton from his solitary cabin to that final confrontation where he found family is what transforms mere words into something that matters. Colton and Josie's story reminds me that family isn't always about blood. It's about who we choose to protect, even at great cost. I'm curious, has someone ever stepped into your life when you needed them most, becoming family through choice rather than birth? Or have you been that person for someone else? Share your story of chosen family in the comments because these connections deserve to be honored, whether they formed on the frontier or in your own life today. If this journey through Wyoming's winter stirred something in your heart, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button and consider subscribing. The frontier is rich with stories of people finding family in unexpected places, and I'd be honored to share more of them with you. Until next time, may you find warmth in the coldest seasons and people worth protecting in your own journey.